neuropathy spectrum disorder in her right ear, and sensorineural in her left. At the age of 22 months, Maddie received bilateral cochlear implants at Nemours Children's Hospital. And 2 weeks later, Maddie had what we call her special ears turned on. From there, it was many mapping sessions that optimized the functionality of the cochlear implant. We also had twice weekly speech therapy sessions at Nemours for 2 years, and eventually started the listening and spoken language program at Christina Early Education Center. Today, Maddie is finishing mainstream second grade with supports from her 504 plan. Those are the facts, and here are the emotions. I remember waking up the day after Maddie had her ABR, or auditory brainstem response, and my husband and I found out that she was deaf. I remember that morning the sun was shining. I could see the stream of light peering through the sliver of a window not covered by curtains. But the sunshine was lost on me. There was a dark cloud covering me, and it followed me for days everywhere. I was worried and felt overwhelmed in this new world I knew nothing about. I didn't know anyone who was deaf. I didn't know what my baby's life would now look like. I felt completely lost. There are worse things, to be sure, and regardless of the outcome, I would have considered myself fortunate to have such a wonderful daughter who is otherwise completely happy and healthy and unencumbered. But it wasn't something I was expecting. So I learned everything I could about hearing loss and possible outcomes with and without cochlear implants, were Maddie to even be a candidate. I also had so much support from family, friends, and the professionals we began to work with after receiving the diagnosis. I also allowed myself to grieve the diagnosis in my own way and on my own time. I celebrated small and not so small achievements, like when Maddie started to babble and then said her first word, no. And then a few weeks ago, I got to watch Maddie stand in front of a crowd of people at Here We Go as she told other kids who have special ears like her that she hopes they feel special just like she does. 5 years ago, I had a really hard time telling others that my daughter was deaf. That word was raw and scary to me, and I didn't know how to accept that Maddie couldn't hear. I tried to get Maddie to use her hair to cover her implants so strangers wouldn't look at her perplexed. Today, I say my daughter, Maddie, is deaf, and I say it with pride. Just as Maddie pulls her hair back almost every day into a ponytail, not caring what her devices look like. I have a tattoo on my arm dedicated to her deafness. And why? Because Maddie is the person she is because of her diagnosis and the choices we've made thereafter. She's awesome. She taught me so much about life and what hard work looks like. And she's the reason I'm here today in this role, sharing my story, trying to help make a difference. Okay. So next, I'm gonna pass it along to Rashaun and Tyheshia and to talk about their daughter, Maddison, another Maddie.
Yes, and so we want to thank Parent Information Center and Arielle for inviting us here. A while ago, my wife and I, we decided that we have the responsibility to be Maddison's strongest advocate and her first advocate. And so I can remember Maddie's now 10. She is a student finishing up her 4th grade at in the Appoquinimink School District at Old State Elementary School. And so I can remember 10 years ago, my wife and I, we got the amazing news that we were expecting a daughter. And so with that, you plan, right? You have preparations, you have baby showers, you create registries. But what you don't prepare for is what came next. After on December 14th, the doctor comes in the room and says, your daughter has passed in the right ear, but failed her newborn hearing screening in the left ear. But don't worry, we're going to retest on tomorrow. And so they come in the room, they take Maddison for her second hearing screening. And so on this day, they come back and say, now she's passed in the left ear and it failed in the right ear. it was the exact opposite of what they told us the previous day. And so again, don't worry. We're going to test her again on the third day, and came back with inconclusive results on the third day that didn't match the results of the previous two. And so my wife and I, we didn't know what to expect. Like Arielle, we are both hearing parents. No one in our family has devices, has hearing loss, and we really didn't have any interaction with individuals or people within the community, this hearing loss community. And so over the next couple of weeks, over the next couple of months, we really didn't know what to expect. Now that we have involvement, we know some of the things we should have done at that time, but because there really wasn't much engagement and knowledge for us, we just took Maddison home from the hospital and started nurturing and caring for her the way we knew how. But what we saw, you want in?
Sure.
Okay.
So it's so exciting to see that even some of Maddison's supports and our current journey as a 10-year-old are on here. So hi to Ms. Thomas and also Mr. McKibben. We see you here, and we're so grateful for you all every day. But yeah, we didn't know what to expect. We had this journey before us. We were excited that we had a healthy baby girl, but we didn't know what it meant. That she would live with hearing loss. And so we did. We took her home. You know, we used our parental intuition. If you gave me two reports that were wrong, or two reports that contradicted each other, and a third report that was inconclusive, I think when we left, they told us she was deaf. She couldn't hear at all. But we felt like she was responding to us even in the room. So we just took her home for a year, and we kept her home, and we didn't let them do anything invasive to our kid. When we brought her back at her first birthday, that's when we allowed the testing, and they said, well, she's not deaf. She has bilateral hearing loss, conductive hearing loss. And so that was where we started our journey. And it actually aligned with what we felt, because we would communicate with her. She would hear the doorbell ring if dad was coming home, and she would turn her head, you know, even without having words yet, we could see that she could hear something. And so that began our journey. And we allowed ourselves to grieve, very similar to Arielle's story, what we thought was going to be our reality, not because this one was so bad, it was just different. And we felt really unprepared to get into this space. And so we began affirmations for Maddie. We began to learn. At that time, we lived in Pennsylvania. So we had the early intervention, and she wasn't intelligible. And so we understood her, but most other people didn't. And so we started the journey of speech and all the things that she needed. She did get fitted for her first set of hearing aids, and they were always brown because we wanted them to match her complexion, so that it wasn't this notion and everyone looking at this kid who had these devices on. And so we kind of just walked that path with her, and we learned as we went along, realizing we don't know this path. We're not experts here, but this is our baby girl, and we'll protect her through this, even with limited information if need be.
Mm-hmm. And so from that perspective and that experience, I see Angie Miller here on the call as well with Hands and Voices. And so when Maddison was in, I believe, first grade, right before the pandemic, actually, in 2020, I had and was afforded the opportunity to attend the EHDI conference in Kansas City. And so this was my first experience, and even our first introduction into this large community that we had no idea existed, the deaf and hard of hearing community. And from that experience, I became an advocate, not only for Maddison, but an advocate for other families with our experience. And so I currently sit on the state EHDI board as the parent representative board member. I work along with Angie with Delaware Hands and Voices as much as we can, and have conversations with her. In addition, I sit with the National Hands and Voices as well. And then also present at the EHDI conferences, national EHDI conferences now, and National Hands and Voices conferences, just about the importance of making accessible accessible for all. And so making sure within minority communities that there's accessibility, making sure that fathers are engaged just as much as mothers. And I just enjoy this space, and looking forward to just moving forward with my engagement and advocacy.
Yeah, but I want to say this, you're looking at two very busy and accomplished people. Like, we don't need another thing to do. Hearing the boards and hearing the involvements, these are our best efforts at understanding the community, looking around, seeing no one that looks like us or our kid, right? My husband going to conferences and saying, there are no men here. Like, how my husband is the predominant person who takes Maddison to her hearing appointments. And he'll walk in the room and they'll say, well, where's mom? And he'll say, but I'm dad. So we're clearing space as we learn and as we attempt to be the best advocates that we can be for Maddison. So on her journey, we equipped her with affirmations and just different things that we thought she would need as we go through this journey. She was in a mainstream classroom, and so we created these affirmations for her. And before she went to kindergarten, we took a lot of her strategies and feelings that she shared with us and put them into a book for her. And this was a reminder of her strategies, because she was really nervous about going into this new classroom, mainstream space. She said, well, my teacher may not understand how to use my SM system, all the stuff. We wrapped it into a book for her. We presented it to her. We put it on Facebook and it went nuts. And so she became a published author. Those are her thoughts at that point. And every year on her birthday, she's wanted to publish another book. So we've got a series called Maddie's World. Again, what I love about it is the book usually precedes us. It goes before us to teachers and the like to help them understand our child. It's helped us take our district on a journey with us. Our superintendent, Matt Burrows, supported her first book launching since she was 5 years old, because this is us helping the people who ultimately care for our kids come on the journey with us. I've had to insert myself into school plans and say, what happens when there's a drill and my kid can't hear? Oh, great. Now that we've got that figured out, what about the other kids, the ones that can't walk and the ones that can't? What do we do when we have these limitations? Because without this lived experience, oftentimes I feel the plans don't afford or include our children. And so you're looking at parents that are busy, and we're learning as we go. We have not arrived. This is a journey. And sometimes it's a scary journey. My kid right now is functioning with Plan B hearing aids because the dog ate the molds on Plan 1 and the hook fell off too. And we just have not been able to get to Nemours. We're trying our best to put it in the schedule and go all the way there. So what am I saying? We're not perfect. It's a journey, and we're doing the absolute best we can every single day for our girl. And so that's our story.
Thank you both so much. We really appreciate you both being here. And next, I'm going to pass it to Jen, who is mom of Brooklyn.
Hello, thanks for having me. That's my favorite title, Mom of Brooklyn. Yeah, so my daughter is Brooklyn. She is 3.5 years old. She has a diagnosis of Pendred syndrome. Similar to, the journeys of the other parents who've spoken already, she initially passed her newborn hearing screening in her left ear, but she kept referring in her right ear. We live in Sussex County, so we were at BB. We went back the next day, she referred again. And then we went back a week later, she referred again. And then they had us see an audiologist down here in Sussex County. And I think, as most people on this call know, most of Sussex County is older folks. So the audiologist we saw, that was the clientele that she was most common, working with. And we didn't hit it off exactly walking in there. And Brooklyn was a couple weeks old. And from the time that girl was born, she was not much of a sleeper. So the audiologist was frustrated with me and with her because she wouldn't sleep for the test, and told me she had never had a patient who was so difficult. And I was not happy about that. But we went back probably 2 weeks later, same thing happened. And she told me that she would not see us again. And I said, feeling was mutual. And we went up to Nemours after that. Brooklyn was born October 3rd. And so it was about Christmas time almost when we got up to Nemours for her first, wasn't a sedated ABR, but it was, or an ABR at all, but it was, similar test with different electrodes and things attached to her. And I remember sitting in this chair in a basement. It was pitch black, and it wasn't the same place that we go currently. When we go up there, it was a different part of the hospital, but we were sitting in this chair. Brooklyn's a couple months old. And I was so scared to move because I didn't want the test to be messed up that I sat still. I'm probably for an hour with all these electrodes and things all over her. I ended up with the most gigantic bruise on my arm afterwards because of the weight of her and all the equipment. But I was just so scared to move. And even still, they weren't able to like completely finish the test. But that was the first time that I was told that she certainly had sensory neural hearing loss, not conductive. We didn't know why or the severity yet at that point. And again, at that time, it was still just her right ear. So like drove home that day, sad. I still didn't have answers, but just feeling sad. And then the journey, so that was 2019. So the journey after that became muddled with COVID. We were supposed to be scheduled for a sedated ABR, I think March. So right when everything got crazy here. So that ended up being pushed until I think September. It was around September when we finally got in. Maybe August. It was late. It was not ideal. And so we went in for the sedated ABR. We're able to confirm that Brooklyn had severe to profound hearing loss in her right ear. And at the time, still her left ear was normal. And so, I didn't have any exposure to the deaf or hard of hearing world in terms of actually knowing people. Ironically, I used to work for maternal and child health in the Division of Public Health in Delaware, and then also worked for them, or they were a client of mine after that. And I used to write content for the newborn hearing screening program and like what to do if your child was, not passing the newborn hearing screening. And it's just completely different once it's your child. And I went home and felt like, well, but if her left ear is normal, then we can just proceed as normal. Like she can still hear. We're not going to make any decisions right now. We don't need to think about hearing aids and cochlear implants and like we'll wait until she's old enough and she can tell us how bad this is. And I like all these thoughts are going through my head. So I got a call about having a hearing aid and cochlear implant consultation. And of course, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not interested, but we'll go hear what they have to say. And so went to the appointment. And the audiologist did a simulation of what Brooklyn was hearing. And it was like the Charlie Brown teacher, and so that just was hard for me to accept and to realize like, that's not good enough for my kid. So at that point, we started the conversation about hearing aids. And again, it was just the one ear at the time. So she got fitted for the one hearing aid. And we still didn't know at that point, like a why. I was working with an ENT at Nemours to try to discover if it was CMV. That is a pretty cool story actually for another day, but worked with him. Long story short, that was negative. And then at some point, we thought maybe Brooklyn had more hearing loss. And we knew with sensory neural hearing loss that was an option, a possibility. So had to go do a second sedated ABR at that point. And she ended up, and this is COVID, so doing it all by myself. And that was difficult in itself. So they decided that we should move forward with genetic testing and also an MRI at the same time. So we're doing all these things, CMV, genetics, MRI. And the same day we did the sedated ABR. So we found out that Brooklyn had a condition called EVA, or enlarged vestibular aqueducts. And she typically, if that's the case, and you might also have Pendred syndrome, they often go hand in hand. So we did not have our genetics results confirmed yet, but we were able to confirm EVA that day. And EVA tends to come with some vestibular issues, which confirmed sort of what I was seeing. A lot of people on our team at the time were telling me, no, there's no reason Brooklyn's walking is delayed. That doesn't make sense. That's not common for a child who has hearing loss on one side. Like, it's just, she's not walking yet. That's just Brooklyn. And I just didn't see that. I felt like, she was on track with everything else, but she didn't walk until, 15, 16 months, which is not technically delayed, but it's pushing it for sure. So it confirmed some of my concerns about her vestibular system. And then additionally, we found out that she had lost some hearing in her left ear. She was now showing some mild loss on that side. So pretty much like at this point, every time we've tested her hearing, it's gotten worse. Ended up confirming, sure enough, she does have Pendred syndrome. And so Pendred syndrome basically is, this EVA association, your child can lose hearing for no good reason, essentially. There's also some things that can exacerbate it, like head bumps, head trauma, and for a 3-year-old or even younger, those are fairly common. So that was concerning, but there's also some thyroid things that can pop up in adolescence, and I'm just not even letting myself think too far ahead to that at this point. But, we then started down this road of like researching Pendred syndrome, which, that can be a scary thing to do on the internet. Wouldn't suggest it to anybody, but she ended up getting fit with the second hearing aid. I was working with both Child Development Watch and statewide services at that point. I remember Kristen Johnson suggesting to me that we do a tour of the School for the Deaf. And I had pretty much told her at that point, like, I'm not interested, Kristen. Like, we're going to be a mainstream family. Brooklyn doesn't have any other comorbidities. It's also an hour and a half away from us. Like, I'm not putting my kid on a van. And I had the luxury of, I work remote. And once I did do the tour, and we did it virtually because it was COVID, and every meeting with Kristen was virtual and every meeting with Child Development Watch was virtual. These people were like my little virtual friends for 3 years, never met them in person. But after we had done the tour, I just felt like that was going to be the best thing for Brooklyn, is if she could get there at all, it would be best for her. So I started taking her to the School for the Deaf 2 days a week, drove her from Lewis to Newark, and I would work from there for, the half day that they were available. And then I drove her down to her daycare down here, and we'd do the drop off transition and all that. And Kristen would come down to the daycare here and work with her teachers, and they all had, access to like a little info sheet about her. And my experience with everybody who's Team Brooklyn has just been amazing. And there's several of them on this call, so I will thank you all at the end. But it's been quite a journey. I mean, even as recent as last week or Memorial Day weekend, we had suspected more hearing loss. And so back up to Nemours. Luckily at this point, Brooklyn has been through sedated ABR 3 times, and she's 3.5. And so that's always a scary thing when when your kid has to go under anesthesia. The last time they had to give her like 3 different kinds also. Told you she doesn't like sleeping. But So luckily this last time she was able to just do the behavioral testing and she was stable. So there were some problems with her actual device. So hopefully that's what resolves that problem. But it's just so many things about our journey have made me feel like I was just like destined to be Brooklyn's mom. She is an amazing kid. She is in pre-K now. She is off the charts on everything, meeting all of her milestones. But I think the thing I'm most proud of that kid is the way she advocates for herself. Just yesterday, we met a little girl in the neighborhood. We're walking, and the little girl goes, "What are those things in your ears?" And Brooklyn says, "Those are my hearing aids. I can't hear you without them." Just so matter of factly. And she owns it. It's her personality now. I wouldn't change a thing about her. She's a cool kid. Yeah. She no longer is in physical therapy. She still has a speech therapist who's amazing. She has a teacher of the deaf. Cindy's on here. Thank you for being here. Kathy Riley is on here, who helped with her IEP meeting. I think I attribute Brooklyn's full-time status to everything Kathy coached me to say. So thank you. I see like friends of ours on here, colleagues, Tracy, who was Brooklyn's audiologist at DSD, Mindy Failing, Sarah Wood, hey, Child Development Watch, Arielle, you were also in the IEP meetings, and thank you guys for everything.
Thank you, Jen. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so our last parent, Kelli, she is going to present on her two kids who are Harlow and Ryder. Hi, Kelli.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I start, I just wanted to double check who will be voicing for me today. It's Hale. Okay, perfect. I just wanted to double check. And can we make sure that we have the interpreters pinned as well, just so we can be sure. So that's an example of how I advocate for myself as a deaf individual. My name is Kelli, last name is Adasko, and well, I have many hats that I wear on a daily basis. I am a spoken language specialist here at the School for the Deaf, and I am also a mom of 2 children. And, you know, as far as deaf children are concerned, each of them has quite a different kind of hearing loss. So it's definitely a different level of hearing loss that we see with the 2 of them. My son, his name is Ryder, and as of right now, he is 7 years old. And, oh, thank you so much for clarifying that. So when he was in the 1st grade, he's in the 1st grade right now here at the deaf school. And my journey with him has been quite different than compared with my journey with my daughter. Her name is Harlow as well. This is her name sign. She is 3.5 years old, and she is also a student here at the deaf school. Yes, I do want to clarify that. Both of my children are deaf, my husband as well. We are an entire deaf family of 4 people. Yep. So we have a lot of deaf people in our family as well, extended family. So we are a little bit generational, and it is definitely a generational thing. I don't think that has necessarily been confirmed with any genetic testing, but that is definitely the way that we grew up, and that's how we identify. And we do have varying characteristics and levels of that as well. So anyway, back to my story with Ryder specifically. You know, I tried to keep him, I'll try to keep it short and sweet because I have 2 children and it's quite a journey. But my son, Ryder, you know, he was born and they went ahead and proceeded with the screening, and he failed with that. And so my husband were like, okay, no big deal. Wasn't a big shocker to us. And we knew that the chances would be 50-50 with that. So we said, okay. And then we were definitely curious about the specifics of his hearing loss and what does that look like? What are the characteristics of that? We simply wanted more information. So my husband and I had a little bit of a different upbringing in concerns to that. My husband grew up oral himself, and then later he ended up going to school and learning ASL. So, I had a different experience than him. And so that kind of affected our decision making with Ryder specifically. And a few weeks later, we had heard that we had to do a hearing screening again, and they confirmed that he was absolutely still deaf and fine by us. So we live in South New Jersey at the time. So we ended up going to Philadelphia for a hearing examination that was a little bit closer in proximity for where we were living at the time, but at that time specifically, because we were doing a lot of commuting, a lot of appointments. We had to go every 2 or 3 months because Ryder was having some issues with some fluids in his ears. So that was definitely something that we had to do a lot of research on. And his ABR specifically said that he had moderate hearing loss. So there was that. And, that we were again curious about his functioning level. So they performed quite a few different tests. And again, it showed that there was a lot of fluid. It wasn't necessarily that we would be told that he was profound, he was moderate, he was severe, and we were just kind of on this roller coaster of not getting clarified answers. So regardless of that specifically, we went ahead and fitted him for hearing aids right away. And I think that he was approximately 7 or 8 weeks old at the time that we did that. So we were very quick on the button. We wanted to be able to provide him something, see what it would be able to do for him. And at 4 months old, he had already started using American Sign Language. So, and I mean it, at 4 months old, he had already started learning signs and showing acquisition of the language. So, this was definitely something exciting for us because we could communicate with our son right away, and we could figure out what his desires were, what his needs were. We could use gesturing, actual designated signs, and also we were able to receive an early intervention service from New Jersey State as well. So at approximately 3 months old, we had already started that journey. And instead of having a teacher of the deaf, we weren't necessarily sure about that. We wanted to proceed with the spoken language route, the speech language pathologist route. And, we felt that if we assumed that he was hard of hearing, we might not be necessarily satisfied with the needs that they provide him, because there were we just couldn't really fulfill that whole area when it comes to education, ASL, visual communication. As parents, we can absolutely navigate that. But my husband, he speaks very well. He is very receptive. I think his receptive skills are a little bit harder. And it's definitely, he uses a cochlear implant himself as well. So we definitely received early intervention for that reason. And while we were kind of navigating that process of hearing loss and receiving different services, definitely satisfied all of the milestones and hit them in terms of what kind of services were provided. But by 10 months old, there was still kind of some identity issues with the hearing loss, trying to identify where exactly we should go for services. The tubes were taken care of. We did take care of that for both ears and had the surgery required for that. And we said, okay, we do what we got to do. Things are going well. Approximately 3 weeks after that surgery, though, and he had recovered, we had to perform even more hearing tests. So with that being said, that is where our journey really became a little bit challenging for us. At 11 months old, we had to perform even more hearing tests, and it was determined that he was profoundly deaf bilaterally, and we were just a little bit taken aback by that. My husband was absolutely just candid with it. Okay, that's the process. What do we have to do? But I was a little bit different. I was like, wait a minute, I'm not opposed to this at all. I completely support the services we need to provide as long as we have the right choices for him, developmentally speaking. And so with that being said, let's take a look at our son and really examine his performance, the behaviors that he's exhibiting with the hearing aid specifically, before we go ahead and start with the CI. And we have to take a look at the functioning as well and the different terminology that he's already acquired. So to me, as somebody who is profoundly deaf, and I did wear hearing aids growing up as well, that was not exactly, I didn't have the same exact schematic experiences as my son. And, in terms of knowing kind of whether the doorbell's ringing, if the dog is barking, without hearing aids on, that kind of information would be lost. And so I find that very interesting. And I found that interesting for Ryder's journey as well. And with that being said, I just didn't feel that he was profoundly lost. I didn't feel like that was the right diagnosis for him. And then in terms of the early intervention, the individuals on that team, we kind of let them know about what was going on, and they were definitely taken aback as well, because he didn't exhibit behaviors of profound hearing loss either. That didn't exactly fit with the functioning behavior that he exhibited. There was definitely a disconnect. So before my husband and I wanted to go the CI route, we definitely wanted a second opinion. So my husband and I had a discussion, and he really wanted to go the CI route, but I thought that it would be best to go ahead and talk with another professional first. So we went to New York City, and you have to understand that my husband and I, we were over in North New Jersey. So that was kind of our place to go. And that's where we went for audiology, for appointments. And there was the Deaf and Hard of Hearing organization up there as well that my husband, his father was on the board there. So going to New York City, that was definitely a journey, several hours drive for us, and Philadelphia was only 30 minutes away. So with that being said, this was an important decision. Surgery requires a lot. And so I was definitely willing to make that trek in order to get out there to New York City. So we did. And once we got there, the audiologist, had a look at a Ryder who was 11 months old, examined him, and I did not share with him the results from previous providers. I wanted a completely unbiased opinion upon his examination that would be completely neutral. So he performed a test that lasted almost 2 hours and ended up telling us that he had moderate to severe hearing loss, not profound. Not even remotely close to profound at all. And that makes a huge difference in this journey in terms of having surgery as well. We asked him more questions, and we asked him what he thought. Would Ryder be a good candidate for the CI? And they ended up telling us, no, absolutely not, because he is already very skilled at acquiring language, at acquiring lip reading, speech, whatever you want to name. He has demonstrated characteristics of acquisition, and he could potentially go that route with the CI, but he already has so many different services set up for him, and we thought it would be best to just let him be and see what happens. And my husband said, okay, that's it, conversation done, we'll leave it alone. And with that being said, we did fit him for new hearing aids, and the new hearing aids that he had prior to were loaned. They were definitely loaners, and they were used hearing aids. So that is something to take into consideration as well. We had gotten them in Philadelphia. So we had some theory about that, but I won't even get into that right now. So, okay, we went ahead with the new hearing aids, got the new insurance to cover it, all the good stuff, and got them fitted, got them on. We noticed that they were a better fit, more empowering, and obviously there was newer technology at the time, so that was great. And he just thrived from there. So that is the kind of in a nutshell version of the audiological journey that we had with Ryder. And we ended up placing him at 3 into mainstream school over in New Jersey. And with that being said, that was also a bit of a challenge. We found out he did have a deaf teacher. He did have an interpreter that was full-time with him as well in the classroom. So, general education, he did have the support. A lot of students in the class. That was good. That was not bad. But, at 3 years old, as an ISP student, they have services that are provided. And so as compared to other kids, that's something I have to take into consideration. But he had a good learning experience overall. And then COVID happened. So there was the pandemic, and then that became, he kind of everything became virtual. It was much more challenging. He couldn't really follow well when using Zoom, and it just a laundry list of facets that became challenging. So we kind of stopped that route specifically. And in terms of my daughter now and kind of how that fits into the whole point of what I'm trying to get at right now is that in January of 2020, my daughter was born, and we were really excited to have a girl. We had both a boy and a girl. We did the hearing tests and the screenings, and she failed. We said, okay, it is what it is. Here we go, another journey. We're going to do this again. We've learned from the last time, and Philadelphia was out of the question. So we ended up going to the same provider in New York City. And, I want to say that, at about 5 weeks old, 3 to 5 weeks old, we took Harlow to New York City and they did all of the examinations, and it was quite an ambiguous result. Everything was just muddled. And I said to myself, here we go again, because, we just decided to go ahead with hearing aids again. We called, placed the order before we even got there. So we had already received the hearing aids by the time that we got to the appointment. I mean, she was like 5 weeks old and we had the hearing aids ready to go. So we had those on. You have to understand that she did not have any of the fluid issues that Ryder had in his ears. At 3 to 5 weeks old, it was a bit early to find any accuracy within the hearing tests, and that was something that I took into consideration. So, they did a low setting hearing test for her, and we just kind of waited to see what happened. She acquired many signs for ASL very early, just like Ryder, but my husband noticed, and I noticed a difference in her. The way that she vocalized things, it was very similar to the way Ryder did. She was a little bit more quiet, a little bit more perceptive. In terms of things, she flourished a little bit earlier than Ryder, but they're different kids, and I get that. Then COVID happened. And, that is over in New York City. It was definitely, I think we're going to switch interpreters right now. We'll switch to Christina.
All right. So where was I? I'm sorry. Remind me where I was. Okay. So I was talking about my daughter. So then we're dealing with COVID. Everything was shut down. New York City, was a hot spot for COVID at that time. So everything was closed down. We couldn't go for testing at all. So we did have a local audiologist who usually works with older people that need hearing aids, that sort of place. We were able to go there, but they didn't have the type of hearing test that we really needed. It was just kind of for hearing aid repair and that sort of thing. They were able to do some observations of my daughter, some minimal basic stuff. They just didn't have the team to really determine what kind of hearing loss she had. It wasn't that type of place. But at least we had something during 2020 and 2021 for that. And everything was just completely shut down in New York City for that whole time. And so until like September of 2021. So that was what we were dealing with at that time. Now, related to our experience with my son, yes, my daughter had hearing aids, but we didn't know what level her hearing loss was. So it would kind of come up to the new issue about a year ago. So my son wasn't doing so well in school. No, I'm sorry. That was 2 years ago now. Yeah, 2 years ago in the fall. So my son was starting to have some challenges in the mainstream setting. So my husband and I started talking about it, and we said, you know what? He needs something more than what this program is offering him. His teacher retired. We couldn't find a new one. And they had an itinerant teacher that would come for 30 minutes a week to check on him. And I was like, you know what? This is not acceptable. He needs somebody full time. And we had already been receiving those services at that time. And what he had been receiving was working. It was not working now. So we weren't feeling comfortable about this. My husband and I started talking about it and just having mixed feelings about the program. It's a wonderful program and they meant well, but we just were experiencing challenges, especially with masks and things like that. My son needed more, especially communicating visually. So then we were also having the challenges trying to figure out my daughter's hearing loss. And we decided at that time, let's move to Delaware at some point down the road. So looking at both of our kids and their needs. We were struggling with mainstream. It's not working well. We don't know what my daughter's hearing loss is. We were completely dependent on ASL. So it felt, you know what, now's the time to move to Delaware. I said, point blank, it is. You know, at that point, I became mama bear. I was in mama bear mode. And I said, this is not working. You know, I'm commuting. My son commutes 40 minutes to his mainstream program. My daughter is in a daycare and it's unreliable because we don't have the correct match with hearing aids for her hearing loss. People are masking, it's not working. And we made the decision. I said, I'm moving to Delaware, told my husband, you can join me or not. And of course he did. He was willing to do that. We started looking for a home. And so we moved to Delaware. And so this fall, it'll be 2 years that we've been living in Delaware. And I've been working here for over 10 years now, but we have been living here for 2 years. So anyways, we got ourselves moved here and my daughter started ELP and we were like, where is, you know, what kind of school can we have for her? She's 20 months old. You know, what are we going to do with this? You know, who wouldn't, you know, take advantage of that opportunity? So we went ahead and put her in kindergarten there at ELP, got that process started. And then about 2 or 3 months later, we were realizing that something was going on with my son. Something was up with him. So far, his hearing and his speech development had been good, but something was going on. So then we discovered that he was having vision issues. So he was diagnosed legally blind in one eye. So he's got 2400 vision, which, wow, what an impact that made on everything we were experiencing, everything with my son, his development, everything, you know, had been great. But his ASL development had been really weak. And then we realized it was because he wasn't seeing well. You know, he didn't have that hearing loss, or he had that hearing loss. And he wasn't able to visually take in the communication the way we had expected. And so that was where those missing pieces were. So we got him glasses, did some eye patch treatment. He did that for over a year. And he's back now to normal vision 20/30. And that is an absolute celebration for sure. But man, it was such a journey to get where we are today. And for my daughter, she's been at ELP, doing great. Her language development has really taken off. We can have full conversations. And honestly, I couldn't be more proud of our decision to move and relocate for our children. And now my daughter's hearing loss, well, we finally have an update on that. That we have had her tested several times. It took about 6 months to a year just because of her age, her inability to sit still, not really wanting to sit for a hearing test. She had the sedated ABR, and then we found out that she's profoundly deaf in one ear, and the other ear is moderate to severe. Now let me explain. That's what she is on paper. On paper, it says that she's got more hearing than my son does. But by her actual function and ability, she is deaf. She's done speech therapy. She will speak and imitate sounds. With the correct hearing aids, she's able to pick up sound. But when she walks out of the speech room, she will not speak at all. She signs 100%. So my husband and I talked about a cochlear implant, and we said, is this a right fit for our daughter? She is profoundly deaf in one ear, moderately in the other. You know, would this give her a better opportunity? Would this be a right fit for her? But watching her development, it's not something that she's ready for at the moment. You know, that is definitely still on the table. It's a decision for another time. We would like to see how she does first. Right now, she's very happy. My son is very happy. They are both thriving. So honestly, we couldn't be more proud of them. And I think really that pretty much sums up the journey with both of our children. Sorry if I went on too long, but I've got 2 children and this is our story. for sure.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Before we move into a discussion or questions, I just want to take a minute to thank all of the parents that spoke today, because I know it's hard, it's emotional, but I know that it can help a lot of other parents listening. So thank you so much, and also thank you to our interpreters for helping share these stories. I know there were a bunch of questions about Maddie's books in the chat, but I think those were answered. I don't know if you guys wanted to say anything before, but yeah, I'm just going to open it up to anyone if you want to say something. I see Mike's hand raised.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for those wonderful stories. And Arielle, you were right; they were very emotional, and they helped me as an educator, because I think often it's easy to lose that human touch and that sense of the journey that you experience as a family with your son or daughter with hearing loss, when we're just in the classroom focusing on IEP goals or their education and things like that. So it's so important for me to hear those stories. I do have a question, a very broad question, but before I say that, I want to give a shout out to a former student of mine who's on here, Ivan Robinson, who's now a counselor at DVR. I taught him when he was at the Delaware School for the Deaf. So that's another thing you've all mentioned about the deaf community and the hard of hearing community. I know many of you out there. It is a small, tight-knit community, and we're happy to support in any way we can all the time. And it's just nice to see everybody. My question would be, you may not be able to answer it in this session, so we could think about this maybe in another session down the road. But as family members, after you've told your story, I'm curious as an educator, what you think we do well in Delaware in terms of deaf and hard of hearing education, and what are the challenges, or where can we do better, I guess would be my question.
Does anyone want to respond? Jen?
Sure. You're asking as educators specifically, or like the system as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the system in general, but also as your experience with the educational process, what works well in education and where can we kind of improve? But yeah, I think you could address it as a system or systemic thing.
Yeah, what was really frustrating for me initially was that very first sedated ABR that Brooklyn had. She tested severe to profound in her test. That's what was on paper. What the audiologist told me in the waiting room was that she had moderate to severe hearing loss. And so I, left that thinking she could still hear in her left ear. So, maybe we can get by with just that. It wasn't until I received a call from Child Development Watch, which also I knew was coming because of my educational background and working in public health, but you still aren't expecting it necessarily. I hadn't even received her paperwork from the hospital that actually said her diagnosis or anything yet, and received a call from Child Development Watch to tell me her diagnosis. And it was different on the phone than what the provider had told me at the hospital. And so I had to go through the grief process all over again, because I found out that my daughter was basically deaf in that ear, like totally, like it's so much more extreme than I had thought. And it wasn't on the fault of Child Development Watch at all. It was the provider. They never sent me any paperwork ever. They never followed up, and they told me the wrong information in the hospital. So that was horrible. My experience, we're Cape School District. It has been phenomenal. I've been nothing but happy. The transition from Child Development Watch and working with statewide services to working with the Cape and Lopin School District has been amazing. There have been like some pleasant surprises along the way. I knew I wanted Brooklyn to move into a mainstream setting eventually, and she is in that, but has the best of both worlds. I was concerned that maybe she wouldn't have access to ASL anymore and that would fall off. But there is another little deaf girl in her class who has an interpreter. She is nonverbal, so she, Brooklyn has access to that all day, at least for this year. Her team, some of which are on this call, have just been amazing. They communicate really well with me. The hardest thing I think about being where we are, and I know that her team tries to address this as much as possible, is there's just not the same community in Sussex County as there is in Newcastle. We don't have access to the same things. There is the health equity is not equitable down here. So, they do their best to send me information and things to have community, but it's just not here. So and things like this that Parent Information Center are putting together helps for sure. So.
Anyone else want to respond? Oh, I see another hand up. Melissa?
Hey, yeah, I'm a parent of a 13-month-old with bilateral, somewhere between moderate to severe hearing loss. I have two very different questions. I guess first being just kind of hearing your story about how long it takes to get a real reading. Any tips for kind of dealing with that and how long reasonably I should expect that to take? And then kind of on the flip side, you mentioned this, Jen, a few times, like the emotional side. How do you deal with that kind of grief process and just all the different spectrum of things that you constantly are kind of getting every time you're going through all the appointments and everything like that?
Shoot, I don't know that I'm the best person to ask about that. I cry every time I talk about it. So Brooklyn's situation is hard emotionally because Pendred syndrome has fluctuations. She can have good days and then bad days. It can be in the same week. And every time we have had a hearing appointment, her hearing has gotten worse, except for this last time. So I definitely have like a stress response every time we go for a hearing check because it's always not gone well. But leaning on the people who are on your team. Kristen Johnson, I wish she was here today, but she was amazing. So was, the other team members here, but she was like my right hand through everything. And at some point you'll get to a point of it, not just acceptance, but like love. Like I can't imagine Brooklyn any other way now. Like if she was miraculously healed and could hear, that would be weird. That's not her. So I think it takes time and you have to give yourself some grace and just ride the wave, to be honest.
Thank you. All right, so I see Kathy's and then Rashaun and Tyheshia after that.
I just wanted to jump in and say, as an audiologist, right? So Melissa, I've been an audiologist, as you can tell, I'm old, for 40 years. And technology has come a long way, but first of all, hearing can change. And as Jen said, it can fluctuate. It can also decrease over time. But also all of the tests that are happening now at that young age are really looking at the neurological perspective of how sound is traveling from the ear to the brain. Just remember that a hearing test, at some point they'll put it on a graph, right? And there's like what you can hear and what you can't hear. But that's a little bit to me like looking at the edge of the water, right? So you can see on a pond where the water is and where the water is not, but it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of that. It doesn't tell you anything about the currents, the temperature, how deep it is. I mean, it doesn't tell you any of those things. I can tell you, having done this for a really long time, that you can take 10 kids with the same audiogram and see 10 different kids, right? So part of it is the journey, and not panicking, but Jen talked about acceptance. I think I teach college now, and so I always talk with my students about the fact that it's not one and done. You don't just come to an okay place and stay there. It's a cycle. Something new and different will happen that you weren't expecting, and you'll be sad again for a little bit, and then you'll get yourself back together. It tends to get quicker over time that you kind of recover, but it can be a question that somebody asks you, or the hard part when kids are little, and I've talked with a million families about this. You're in the grocery store and your kid has their hearing aids on, and some little old lady comes up and says, "Oh, that's so sad." And you just want to punch her in the face and say, "Get away from me," right? So, yeah, lean on other parents. Lean on your team, but lean on other parents. Find, these kinds of support groups are, as a professional, I can know a lot, but I don't wake up to it at 3:00 in the morning, and I don't get up to it on Christmas morning, and I get to go home, right? So lean on the people that are in the same boat with you. I think that's important. Yeah. And I'm on here, there's 2 guys on here who are former students of mine, both with different hearing losses, and they're both great guys who have wonderful educations and jobs. And I think the other scary part is it's important to find role models, right, for who your daughter's going to be. And Kelly's another one. I worked with Kelli for a long time, and what you hear and don't hear isn't the final say in how life goes, right? So
Thank you, Kathy.
yep.
And
Rashaun and Tyheshia.
Sure. Wanted to respond to Melissa's question more so around what to do with the anxiety. And I wasn't sure if you were talking about the anxiety that our children feel, because it's very real, or the anxiety that we as parents feel. And so for us as parents, it doesn't mean that it's everyone's fix, but we really decided to reframe the journey. This is not a bad journey. It's uncertain, it's unfamiliar, but my husband is an advocate, and we really intend and work hard to find the joy in the journey. We're raising a brilliant little girl who advocates for herself and decides to sit in the front of the room, and she knows it's not okay to be the brown girl in the back of the classroom who can't hear, who everyone forgot about. That's beautiful. And so we just look to find those pockets of joy, and being able to bottle our experience and share it in forums like this, and parents who will call us after this, that helps us with finding the joy in the journey. We reframe it. It's not what we thought. Our reality is not what we envisioned, and that's over. So now every day we will pick up this journey and we will figure this out. My kid's going to run out of here without taping on her hearing aids every morning. I'm going to say, "Fresh tape." And she's going to say, "Okay." And on the bus, she's going to start doing all the things because of our journey. It's our journey, where there are other kids with hearing loss and they wear hearing aids and they do something different. It's our journey, and it's also our journey to love along the way. And that's kind of the way we look at it. What you got, Dave?
And so also, I know one thing when I was actually speaking on a panel last week, and they were asked the question, what's one thing that we wish we would have had, right? And so Maddison is 10 now, 5th grade. But I can remember feeling on the island as when she was 1, right? Feeling all alone. And one thing that I believe is a huge help for newer parents is forums like this. I don't know if it existed 8, 9 years ago, but if it did, we didn't know. And so taking advantage of opportunities like this to feel that you're not all alone. Hearing, we heard Arielle's story, we heard our story, we heard Kelli, and then we heard Jen, and the similarity of each story, the things that align with all of our stories. And I'm sure if the parents on here was able to talk, they would be able to share their story and it would be similar. And to know that I identify with this, I'm not alone. But then also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Hands and Voices, but the websites and then the resources that are available, not only on the Delaware Hands and Voices, but then on the National Hands and Voices website as well. I lead a workshop at the conventions on fostering joy. There's a page on Facebook where we share our joy spots, because joy is intentional, and finding the joy moments in this journey is it helps even on the emotional side of dealing with what we have to deal with as parents in this journey.
Yeah, and one thing on the kid side with the anxiety, if that was also a game in your question, we equipped Maddie at a very early age with default phrases, very similar to what Jen said. When kids would look at her, or when she would try to include herself and they say, well, what are those? And she'd say, oh, these are called hearing aids. They help me hear better. Giving her those default phrases allowed her to have some control. And sometimes kids would look at her and not ask the question, and she'd be able to insert herself and say, oh, I can play soccer better than you. I can do the same things you do. I just do them a little differently. And we wrap those stories and those things into her books to share, not just with other kids with, hearing loss, but broader populations, to help just create a more inclusive world. So, she'll tell you, being different doesn't make you less than, it makes you different. These are phrases that we've created with her. And it's our prayer that throughout the day, that's what plays in her mind. More than I'm different, I'm alone, they're looking at me there. No, it's different. And that's all it is. So now let's go win, whatever that means for you. So that's it. Mr. McKibben asked the question, and I definitely wanted to respond really quickly. Mr. McKibben, some of the things that the district does very well here as it relates to Maddison is the overall just helping her to become more of a stronger advocate for herself. There are things we wanted and preferred for our daughter that perhaps we misunderstood with our IEP. And Maddison has been able to even come to us and say, the way you understand it is not what it really is, Mom. Miss Thomas said preferential seating is, or even when she was much younger working with Mr. McKibben, I would take her batteries and stick it on the chart to read it. And she'd say, I learned a drop test because Mr. McKibben taught me, throw it across the room. And I'm like, why do we throw batteries across the room? So I'm saying that I think all of those inputs have helped stand our daughter up, not just in a way that we teach her to advocate, but in a way where she's able to advocate overall, even as it relates to what we think her journey should look like. Something that should improve. Our kid is in a make it a little harder, why don't we? Our kid is in a Mandarin immersion program. She's been in the program since she was in kindergarten. Well, we don't have the supports in place to make sure that her supports are being rolled out in Mandarin, because the only people who speak Mandarin is the teacher. So are the questions being repeated twice and all of these things? Is that really happening? It's hard to kind of measure that oftentimes. And so that's one area I would like to improve. However, we've given Maddison several outs. You don't have to do this. This is hard. In the beginning of the school year, she usually cries. There's been some regression, but she'll tell you, I have a right to speak Chinese, and that's a part of my culture. And I have a right to do it. And we let her do it because she feels like this is a part of her culture. We will not rip or take that from her just because the journey is hard. But I do think that we need, if we're going to offer it and she's eligible and she's able, then we better be able to support it with metrics that say our kids are getting the services and the supports that we need overall with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will say on that, letting your kids do what they want to do. Not saying that they should be held back because of their devices or not being able to, just go out and communicate with anyone. You have to let them go. You have to let them fly, I say. My daughter, she likes to swim, and it's a pain because we've got to put these covers on top of her ears and put a thing on her head after so she can hear in the water. But she does it and she enjoys it, and we do it. And she's happy in there. So I just say don't let a diagnosis hold you back. And especially don't let your child Kelly, I did see your hand up. Did you want to say anything else? You're good? Okay.
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, we are a little bit over the hour, so I don't want to keep anyone. I want to say thank you again, everyone, for being here, for our parents. I really appreciate it. And to parents that are on this call, we do have in-person events. If you want to be hooked up with, PIC or Hands and Voices or Deaf Mentor, there are so many supports in the state. And I'm happy to direct you since you do have my information. Please feel free to reach out to me. We have an in-person event next week, June 14th at Can Do Playground, which is not far from the Nemours Hospital. If anybody is able to get there, there's going to be kids and pizza and sodas, and should be a good time. So thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thanks again for being here and telling your story. It was great. You guys were awesome.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if there was a debrief. It looked like Ivan's hand was up.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, toward the end. I stuck it in the chat as well. So you mentioned an event coming on. What was the date on that?
It's June 14th, at 5:30. What is that again? Now I'm looking to see. I'm sorry, there's so much going on that I forget. Yeah,
No
so
worries.
it's next Wednesday. So a week from tomorrow at 5:30 at Can Do Playground. Similarly to the one you guys attended, except that it's going to be outdoors at the playground.
Okay.
So if you're able to make it, I would love to see you guys. It'd be great.
Can you text me the flyer?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Arielle, I'm going to schedule some time with you. I've got questions myself on some things as it relates to Delaware and the supports and even the medical situation. And I'm sure you'll help me connect, but I just got questions. Things have changed for us more recently, and I want to make sure I kind of understand how to support Maddie.
Absolutely. Yes, please. As soon as you like.
All right. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.